In the morning, as Dad was driving him to the library, Oswald asked, Dad, how old were you in 1985? I was just a couple years older than you, Dad said, and other than baseball, all I could think about was how many quarters I had to spend at the arcade. Why, you asked? No reason in particular, Oswald said. I've just been doing some research. Jeff's Pizza, back before it was Jeff's Pizza, it was some kind of arcade, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. Dad's voice sounded strange, nervous maybe. He was quiet he was quiet for a few seconds, then said, but it closed. Like everything else in this town, Oswald said. Pretty much, yeah, Dad said, pulling up in front of the library. Maybe it was Oswald's imagination, but it seemed like his dad was relieved to get to their destination so he won't have to answer any more of his questions. At 11 o'clock sharp, Oswald headed over to Jeff's Pizza. As had become his habit, with Jeff nowhere in sight, Oswald proceeded to the pit. After his count to 100, he stood. There were noises, but not the usual ones of Freddy Fazbear's. Screams, crying children, yells for help, the fast footfalls of people running, chaos. Were Chip and Mike here? Were they okay? Was anybody here okay? He was afraid. Part of him wanted to disappear back into the pit, but he was worried about his friends. Also, he was burning with curiosity about what was going on. Even though he knew whatever it was horrible. He wasn't in danger, he told himself, because this was the past, a time way before he was born. His life couldn't be in danger in a time before he even existed, could it? His stomach in knots. He moved through the crowd, past crying mothers running with their toddlers in their arms, past dads grasping children's hands and leading them swiftly toward the exit. Their faces masked of shock. Chip? Mike? He called, but his friends were nowhere to be seen. Maybe they didn't come to Freddy Fazbear's today. Maybe they were safe. Scared but feeling as if they had to know what was happening, Oswald walked to the opposite direction from everyone else with an escalation feeling of dread. In front of him stood the man in the yellow bunny costume. If it was a man under there, the bunny opened a door that said private and went inside. Oswald followed. The corridor was long and dark. The rabbit looked at him with blank eyes and an unchanging grin, then walked further down the hall. Oswald wasn't chasing the rabbit, he was letting the rabbit lead him, as if he were in a terrible, terrifying version of Alice in Wonderland, going down the rabbit hole. The rabbit stopped in front of a door with a sign reading Party Room and beckoned for Oswald to come inside. Oswald was shaking with terror, but he was too curious to refuse. Besides, he kept thinking, you can't hurt me, I haven't even been born. Once inside the room, it took Oswald a few seconds to register what he was actually seeing and a few more seconds for his brain to process it. They were lined up against the wall, which was painted with images of the place's mascots, the grinning bear, the blue bunny, and the bird girl. Half a dozen kids, none of them older than Oswald, their lifeless bodies propped onto sitting positions, their legs stretched out in front of them. Some of them had their eyes closed as if asleep. Others' eyes were open, frozen in an empty, doll-like stare. They were all wearing Freddy Fazbear Pizza Party hats. Oswald didn't tell how they all died, but he knew the rabbit was responsible for it. That the rabbit had wanted him to see his handiwork. Maybe the rabbit wanted Oswald to be his next victim, to join the others lined up against the wall with their unseeing eyes. Oswald screamed. The yellow rabbit lunged for him, and he ran out of the room and down the black corridor. Maybe the rabbit could hurt him, maybe he couldn't. Oswald didn't want to hang around long enough to find out. He ran across the now empty arcade toward the ball pit. Outside, the police sirens' screams matched Oswald's own. The rabbit ran after him, getting too close to that fuzzy ball brushed Oswald's back. Oswald dove into the pit. He counted to 100 as fast as he could. When he stood, the first thing he heard was Jeff's voice. There's the little stinker. Oswald turned to see his dad stomping around while Jeff looked on. Dad looked furious, and Jeff didn't look happy either. Not that he ever did. Oswald stood frozen, too overwhelmed to move. His dad grabbed his arm and pulled him out of the pit. What were you thinking hiding in that nasty old thing? Dad said. Didn't you hear me calling you? After Oswald was out, his dad leaned over the pit. Look at how dirty this is. Your mother, a pair of yellow arms, reached out of the pit and pulled Dad under. The struggle would have been cartoonish if it hadn't been so terrifying. Dad's feet and their brown work boots kicked up to the surface, only to disappear below. Then a pair of big, fuzzy yellow feet appeared, only to appear too, only to disappear too. The balls into the pit rolled like a stormy sea, and then they were still. The yellow rabbit rose from the pit, adjusted his purple bow tie, brushed off his front, and turned toward Oswald, grinning. Oswald backed away, but the rabbit was beside him, its arm firmly around Oswald's shoulders, guiding him toward the exit. Oswald looked at Jeff, who stood behind the counter. Maybe Jeff could help him, but Jeff wore the the same hang dog expression he always wore and just said, "See you later, guys." How could anyone act like the situation was normal? Once the rabbit got him outside, it opened the passenger door of Dad's car and pushed Oswald in. Oswald watched as the bunny buckled its seatbelt and started the car. He tried to open the door, but the bunny had activated the power lock from the driver's side. The bunny's mouth was frozen in a rictus grin. Its eyes stared blankly. Oswald pushed the unlock button again, even though he knew it wouldn't work. Wait, Oswald said. Can you do any of this? Can you even drive a car? The bunny said nothing but started the car and pulled it into the street. It stopped at a red light, so Oswald figured out it must be able to see and must know the basic rules of driving. What did you do to my dad? Where are you taking me? Oswald could hear the panic in his voice. He wanted to sound strong and brave, like he was standing up for himself, but instead, he just sounded scared and confused, which he was. The bunny said nothing. The car made a familiar right turn, then a familiar left into Oswald's neighborhood. How do you know where I live? Oswald demanded. Still silent, the bunny turned into the driveway in front of Oswald's ranch-style house. I'll run for it, Oswald thought. As soon as this thing unlocks the car door, I'll run into a neighbor's house and call the police once I'm safely inside. The locks clicked and Oswald jumped out of the car. Somehow, the bunny was standing right in front of him. It grabbed his arm. He tried to break free, but its grip was too strong. The bunny dragged Oswald into the front door. Then it yanked off the chain around Oswald's neck and held his house key. The rabbit turned the key in the door and shoved Oswald inside. Then it stood in front of the door, blocking the exit. Jinx the cat wandered into the living room, took one look at the rabbit, arched her back, fluffed out her tail, and hissed like a cat in a Halloween decoration. Oswald had never seen her act scared or unfriendly before, and he watched as she turned her tail and fled to the hall. If Jinx knew the situation was bad, it must be really bad. You can't do this, Oswald said to the rabbit in tears. He didn't want to cry. He wanted to look strong, but he couldn't help it. This is kidnapping or something. My mom will be home soon and she'll call the police. It was a total bluff, of course. Mom couldn't be home until after midnight. Would he even be alive by the time Mom got home? Was his dad even alive now? He knew the bunny would grab him if he tried to make a run for the back door. I'm going to my room now, okay? I'm not trying to escape. I'm just going to my room. He backed away and the bunny led him. As soon as he got inside his room, he slammed the door and locked it. He took deep breaths and tried to think. There was a window in his room, but it was high and too small to climb through. Under his bed, Jinx let out a low growl. Oswald could hear the bunny outside his door. If he made a phone call, it would hear him, but maybe he could send a text. He took out his phone and, with shaking hands, texted, Mom, emergency. Something's wrong with Dad. Come home now. Oswald knew even as he texted that she wouldn't be coming home now because she was always dealing with medical emergencies at work. Sometimes it took her a long time to check her phone. It was Dad who Oswald was supposed to contact in the evening of an emergency. But obviously, that wasn't going to work now. A miserable hour passed until Oswald's phone vibrated. Afraid the rabbit might still be listening outside his locked door, he picked up without saying hello. Oswald, what's going on? Mom sounded terrified. Do I need to call 911? I can't talk now, Oswald whispered. I'm on my way home, okay? She hung up. 15 minutes seemed to pass more slowly than Oswald thought was possible. There was a knock on Oswald's door. Oswald jumped, his heart in his throat. Who is it? It's me, Mom said, sounded exasperated. Open the door. He opened the door just a crack to make sure it was really her. Once he let her in, he closed and locked the door behind him. Oswald, you need to tell me what's going on. Mom's brow was furrowed with worry. Where to start? How to explain without sounding crazy? It's Dad. He's not okay. He's not even sure where he is. Mom put her hands on both his shoulders. Oswald, I just saw your dad. He's lying on the bed in our bedroom watching TV. He made you a chicken pot pie for dinner. It's sitting on the stove. Wait, what? I'm not hungry. He tried to wrap his mind around his mom's words. You saw Dad? Mom nodded. She was looking at him like he was one of her parents instead of her kid. Like she was trying to figure out what was wrong with him. And he's okay? She nodded again. He's okay, but I'm worried about you. She put her hand on his forehead as if checking for a fever. I'm okay, Oswald said. I mean, if Dad's okay, I'm okay. He just didn't seem okay. Maybe it's good school starting back. I think you're spending too much time by yourself. What could he say? Actually, I've been spending time with my friends in 1985. Maybe so I probably should just go to my bed. I have to get an early start in the morning. I think that's a good idea, Mom said. She put her hands on his cheeks and looked him directly in the eyes. And listen, if you're going to text me at work, make sure it's a real emergency. You scared me. I thought it was a real emergency. I'm sorry. It's all right, honey. Get some rest, okay? Okay. After Mom left, Oswaldo looked under the bed. Jinx was still there, crouched in a ball like she was trying to make herself as small as invisible as possible, her eyes wide and looking terrified. It's okay, Jinxie, Oswald said, reaching under the bed and wiggling his fingers at her. Mom says it's safe. You can come out now. The cat wouldn't budge. Oswald lay awake on bed. If Mom and Dad was there and okay, then it must be true. Why would she lie? But Oswald knew what he had seen. He had seen the yellow thing as he had started to think of it. Dragged his dad into the pit and had seen the yellow thing climbed out of the pit. Hal felt his grip in his arm, sat beside it in the car and it drove him home. Or had he? If Mom and Dad was home and okay, he must be. Oswald trusted his mom, but if Dad was okay, it meant Oswald hadn't seen what he thought he saw, and that must mean that Oswald was losing his mind. After only a few hours of fitful sleep, Oswald woke to the aroma of frying ham and baking biscuits. His stomach rumbled, reminding him that he had missed dinner last night. Everything felt normal. Maybe he could just treat yesterday like a bad dream and try to move forward. A new school year and a new beginning. He stopped in the bathroom, then made his way to the kitchen. Feeling better? Mom asked. There she was, her hair in a ponytail, wearing her pink, fuzzy bathrobe, fixing breakfast just like always. Something about this fact made Oswald feel tremendously relieved. Yeah, he said. I'm pretty hungry, actually. Now that's a problem I can fix, Mom said. She set down a plate with two ham biscuits on it and poured him a glass of orange juice. Oswald ate the first ham biscuits and three big bites. The yellow thing walked in and sat across from him at the breakfast table. Mom? Oswald's heart beat like a jackhammer in his chest. The ham biscuit sat heavy in his churning stomach. What is it, hon? Her back was turned as she fiddled with the coffee maker. Where's Dad? She turned around, the coffee pot in her hand. Oswald, Oswald, your dad is sitting right across from you, as if this is some kind of elaborate prank. You can cut it out right now because it has officially stopped being funny. She poured her a cup of coffee and sat down in front of the yellow thing, which stared straight ahead. Its mouth set an unchanging grin. Oswald knew he wasn't going anywhere. Either he was insane or his mom was. Okay, I understand. I'll cut it out. I apologize. Maybe I was accused so I can get ready for school. Of course, Mom said, but she was looking at him kind of funny again. Oswald stopped in the bathroom to brush his teeth and then went to his room to get his backpack. He peeked under his bed to find Jake still hiding there. Well, it's good to know there's somebody else in his family who has some sense, he said. When Oswald came back into the car, the yellow thing was standing by the door, car keys in its paw. Is Dad taking me to school? Oswald asked. He didn't know if he could bear sitting beside it in the car again, hoping it was watching the road as it stared through the windshield with its empty eyes. Doesn't he always? Mom said. She could hear the worry in her voice. Have a good day, okay? Seeing no choice, Oswald got into the car beside the yellow thing. Once again, it locked all the doors from the driver's seat. It backed out of the driveway and it passed a jogging neighbor who waved at it just as if it were his dad. I don't understand. Oswald sat on the edge of tears. Are you real? Is this real? Am I going crazy? The other thing said nothing, just stared at the road ahead. When it pulled up in front of Restbrook Middle School, the crossing guard and the kids at the crosswalk didn't seem to notice that the car was being driven by a giant yellow rabbit. Well, hey, Oswald said before he got out of the car. Don't bother picking me up this afternoon. I'll just catch the bus. The school bus was a big yellow thing he could just handle because it was some kind of cosmic law. The first person Oswald saw in the hall was Dylan, his tormentor. Well, 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 if it isn't Oswald the Oz, give it a rest, Dylan, Oswald said, pushing past him. I've got way bigger problems than you today. It was impossible to concentrate in class. Usually, Oswald was a pretty decent student, but how could he focus with his life and possibly his sanity falling apart? Maybe he could talk to someone, the school counselor or the school police officer, but he knew anything about came out of his mouth would sound dangerously crazy. How could he convince a police officer that his dad was missing if everything who looked at the yellow thing saw Oswald's dad? There was no one to help him. Oswald was going to have to figure out how to solve this problem himself. At recess, he sat on a bench by the playground, grateful that he didn't have to pretend to listen to a teacher and could just think. He couldn't imagine how his life would get any weirder. The yellow thing seemed to think it was his father. This was weird enough, but why did everybody else think it was his father too? Do you mind if I share your bench? It was a girl Oswald had never seen before. She had curly black hair and big brown eyes and was holding a thick book. Sure, help yourself, Oswald said. The girl sat in the opposite end of the bench and opened her book. Oswald went back to his confusing thoughts. Have you gone to the school before for a long time? The girl asked him for a few minutes. She didn't look over at Oswald when she talked. She just kept staring at the pages of her book. Oswald wondered if this meant she was shy. Since kindergarten, Oswald said, and then because he couldn't think of another single thing to say about himself, he asked, What are you reading? Greek mythology, she said. Tales of horses. Have you read much mythology? No, not really, he said, feeling stupid immediately after. He didn't want to give the impression that he was the kind of guy who never read books. In desperation, he added, I love to read, though, and then he felt even stupider. Me too, she said. I've probably read this book a dozen times. It's like a comfort book for me. I read it when I need to be brave. The word brave struck a chord with Oswald. Brave was what he needed to be too. Why is that? Well, the great heroes were super brave. They're always doing battle with some kind of big monster, like the Monitor, or the Hydra. It kind of puts things in perspective, you know? No matter how bad my problems are, at least I don't have to do battle with a monster. Yeah, Oswald said, even though he was trying to figure out how to do battle with a monster, a yellow, long eared monster in his own home. He couldn't tell this girl how the yellow thing, though. She would think he was crazy and would be leaving their shared bench in a hurry. So, you say you read the book when you needed to be brave? He was surprised he was having this conversation given the way his mind was racing. For some reason, this girl was easy to talk to. I mean, it may be none of my business, but I was wondering why you need to be brave. She gave a shy little smile. First day at a new school, third day in a new town. I don't know anybody yet. Yes, you do, he said. He held out his hand. I'm Oswald. He didn't know why he was offering his hand like he was some kind of businessman, but it felt like the right thing to do. She shook his hand and shook it surprisingly firmly. I'm Gabriella. Somehow, this was the conversation Oswald had need to have. He took the bus home from school. When he came inside, the other thing was vacuuming the living room. He didn't ask it any more questions. It wasn't as if could give him any answers anyway. And besides, if he was going to make this plan work, he was going to have to act like everything was normal. And as nobody who have seen him in the fourth grade class play knew, acting was not one of his talents. Instead, he had what he was supposed to do when life was normal. When his real dad was vacuuming the living room, he got the feather duster out of the cleaning closet and dusted the coffee table, the end tables, and the lamps. He emptied the wastebasket and neatened the throw pillows on the couch. Then he went to the kitchen and took out the garbage and the recycling. Once he was outside, it was tempting to run, but he knew running was not the answer. If everybody saw the yellow thing was his dad, nobody would help him. The other thing would always catch him. He went back inside. His chores done, he walked right past the yellow thing. I'm going to chill a little while before dinner, he said, even though the possibility of relaxing in any way was unimaginable. He went to his room, but he didn't close the door. Instead, he took off his shoes, sprawled on the bed, and started drawing on his sketchbook. He didn't want to draw mechanical animals, but they seemed to be all he could draw. He shot his sketchbook and started reading a manga, or at least pretending to. Normal. The plan could only work if he acted like everything was normal. When the rabbit appeared in his doorway, he managed not to gasp. It beckoned for him the same way it had been lead him to the murder room at Freddy Fazbear's, and he followed it into the kitchen. On the table was one of the grocery store pizzas his dad kept in the freezer, baked to a pleasing golden brown, and 2 glasses of the fruit punch Oswald liked. The pizza had already been sliced, which was a relief because Oswald couldn't imagine what he would have done if he had seen a thing holding a knife, running, screaming out into the street, probably. Oswald sat down at the table and helped himself to a slice of the pizza. He didn't feel much like eating, but he knew he wouldn't act like anything was wrong. He took a bite of pizza, a sip of punch. Aren't you going to eat anything, Dad? He asked. It was hard calling the thing Dad, but he managed. The other thing sat across from him in silence with its unblinking stare and frozen grin. An untouched pizza slice and a plate in front of it beside an untouched glass of punch. Could it even eat? Oswald wondered. Did it need to? What was it anyway? At first he thought it was a guy in a suit, but now he wasn't so sure. Was it some kind of highly sophisticated animatronic animal or a real flesh and blood giant bunny? He didn't know which possibility was the most disturbing. With great effort, he finished the pizza slice and a glass of punch, then said, Thanks for dinner, Dad. I'm going to get a glass of milk and go do my homework now. The little thing just sat there. Oswald went to the refrigerator. He checked to make sure the yellow thing wasn't watching and poured some milk into a bowl. Once he got to his room, he didn't close and lock the door because he wouldn't if he were home with Dad. Normal. Normal so as not to arouse suspicion. He slid the bowl of milk under his bed where Jinx was still holding. "It's going to be okay, girl," he whispered. He hoped he was right. He sat on his bed and in a few minutes heard Jinx lapping the milk. He knew from past experience that even when terrified, she couldn't turn down dairy products. He made a half-hearted attempt at his homework, but he couldn't concentrate. All he could think about was his dad. The other thing had dragged his dad into the pit and under the surface. Did this mean his dad was at Freddy Fazbear's circa 1985? Wandering around an arcade of games he had played as a kid? That was the most likely explanation unless the yellow thing had killed No. He couldn't let himself think that. His dad was alive. He had to be. The only way to know was to go back into the pit. But first, he was going to have to get out of the house without the yellow thing noticing. Oswald waited until dark, then waited some more. Finally, he grabbed his shoes and tiptoed out of his room and entered the hall with his socked feet. The door to his parents' room was open. He sneaked a glance inside as he crept past. The other thing was lying on its back in his parents' bed. It appeared to be staring at the ceiling. Or maybe it wasn't staring. Maybe it was asleep. It was hard to tell since its eyes didn't close. Did it even need to sleep? Holding his breath, he passed his parents' room and tiptoed into the kitchen. If the other thing caught him, he could always say he was getting a drink of water. The kitchen was the best escape route. The door there was less squeaky than the front door. He slipped to his shoes and pulled the door open slowly, inch by inch. When it was open just wide enough, he slipped through and shut it softly behind him. Then he ran. He ran through his neighborhood and past neighbors walking their dogs and kids riding bikes. Some people looked at Oswald strangely and he couldn't figure out why. People ran in this neighborhood all the time. But then he realized he wasn't running like he was doing it for exercise. He was running like something was chasing him, and it might be. It was a long way to Jeff's Pizza on foot, and Oswald knew he couldn't help keep up his pace all the way there. He slowed to a walk after he was out of his neighborhood and chose to walk side streets instead of the more direct route, so he'd be hard to follow. He was afraid Jeff's Pizza might be closed by the time he reached it, but then he arrived hot and out of breath. The light open sign was still on. Inside, Jeff was at the counter, watching a ball game on TV, but otherwise, the place was empty. "You know, we just served whole pieces at night, no slices," Jeff said in his usual monotone. As always, he looked exhausted. "Yeah, I just stopped by to get a soda to go," Oswald said, his gaze roaming to the roped off ball pit. Jeff looked a little puzzled but finally said, "Okay, let me get a pie out of the oven, then I'll get it for you. Orange, right?" "Right, thanks." As soon as Jeff disappeared into the kitchen, Oswald ran to the back corner and dove into the pit. The familiar musty smell filled his nose as he sank beneath the surface. He sat on the pit's floor. He counted to 100 as he always did, even though he wasn't sure it served any purpose in getting him to make the jump to Freddy Fazbear's in 1985. He shifted on the pit's floor and felt something solid press against his lower back. A shoe. It felt like the sole of a shoe. He scooted around and grabbed it. It was a boot, a steel-toed work boot like his dad used to wear to work at the mill and now wore to his job at the snack space. He moved his hand up a little, an ankle in the kind of thick boot sock his dad liked. He crawled further across the floor of the pit. The face. He had to feel the face. It was some giant furry head like the yellow things. He might never stop screaming, but he had to find out. His hand found his shoulder. He reached out to the chest and felt the cheap fabric of a white undershirt. He was shaking as he reached higher. He felt an unmistakable human face, skin and stubble, a man's face. It was dead, and was he? He had to be alive. He had to be. Oswald had seen shows where people who had been in emergency situations suddenly develop amazing strength and find themselves able to lift the front end of a car or tractor. This was the kind of strength Oswald needed to find. His dad wasn't a big man, but he was still a man and weighed at least twice as much as his son. He had to move his dad if he was going to save him. If this even was his dad, if this wasn't some kind of cruel hoax set up by the yellow thing to trap him. Oswald could have let himself think these thoughts, not if he was going to do what he had to do. He got behind the person, grabbed under his armpits, and pulled. Nothing happened. Dead weight. Oswald thought, no, not dead, please. Not dead. He pulled again, this time with more force, making a noise that was somewhere between a grunt and a roar. This time, the body moved, and Oswald pulled again, standing up and getting the person's head and shoulders above the surface. It was his dad, pale and unconscious, but breathing. Definitely breathing and around them. Not Freddy Fazbear's in 1985, but the normal present day weirdness of Jeff's Pizza. How could Oswald get him out? He could call Mom as a nurse. She could know what to do, but what if she thought he was crazy or lying? He felt like the boy who cried wolf or the boy who cried rabbit. He felt it before he saw it, the presence behind him, the awareness of something in his personal space. Before he could turn around, a pair of yellow, furry arms locked around him in a fearsome embrace. He got his right arm free enough to jab his elbow into the yellow thing's midsection. He got loose, but the thing was blocking the exit to the pit. He couldn't let out of the pit himself, let alone with his poor passed out dad. Acting more than thinking, Oswald charged at the rabbit with his head down. If he could just throw it off balance or knock it under the surface, maybe he could make it end up in 1985 Freddy Fazbear's and buy Oswald and his dad some time to escape. He headbutted the yellow thing and knocked it into the ropes and netting that surrounded the ball pit. It stumbled a little, righted itself, and then arms outstretched lunged toward Oswald. It pushed Oswald against the wall of the pit, its eyes dead as always. It unhinged its jaw to reveal double rows of fangs as sharp as centimeters. Mouth opened freakishly wide and lunged for Oswald's throat, but he blocked it with his arm. Pain pierced Oswald's forearm as the yellow thing sank its fangs into his skin. Oswald used his good arm to punch the rabbit hard in the face before the fangs pierced too deeply. Fangs! What kind of crazy rabbit had fangs? The thing's jaws released their grip, but there was no time to survey the damage because the thing was lurching toward Oswald's dad. Its jaws opened wide, like a snake about to swallow its unsuspecting prey. Its fangs were red with Oswald's blood. Oswald elbowed the yellow thing aside and moved between it as its still unconscious father. You leave my dad alone, he yelled. Then used the netting to bounce off and clamber into the yellow thing's back. He hit its head with his fist, scratched at its eyes, which didn't feel like a living creature's eyes. The rabbit stumbled back into the netting and ropes. Dana grabbed Oswald's arms and swung him hard off its shoulders and into the pit. Oswald fell head first under the surface, grateful that the bottom of the pit was soft. His arm was throbbing, his whole body was exhausted, but he had to get up. He had to save his dad, like those ancient Greek heroes Gabriella had told him about. He had to be brave and face the monster. Oswald rose unsteadily to his feet. Somehow, when it shook Oswald off, the little thing must have gotten tangled into the ropes and netting that lined the ball pit. A rope that was looped around its neck, and it grasped the rope with its big paws, trying to get free. Oswald couldn't understand why it was failing to free itself until he saw that the yellow thing's feet were touching the floor of the pit. The yellow thing was suspended from the rope, which was tied securely to a metal rod at the top of the ball pit. The rabbit had hanged itself. Its mouth was opening and closing like it was gasping for breath, but no sound came out. Its paws clawed desperately at the ropes. Its stare, so terrifying in its blackness, was aimed in Oswald's direction as if it were asking him for help. Oswald certainly wasn't going to rescue it. After a few more seconds of struggling, the other thing was still. Oswald blinked. Hanging from the rope was nothing but a dirty, empty yellow rabbit costume. His dad's eyes opened. Oswald rushed to his side. I don't understand why I'm here, Dad said. His face was pale and unshaven. His eyes puffy with dark half moons under them. What happened? Oswald debated what to say. You were attacked and left for dead by a giant evil rabbit who tried to replace you. And I was the only person who could see it wasn't you. Even Mom thought it was you. No, it sounded too crazy, and Oswald didn't relish the idea of spending years in therapy saying, but the evil rabbit was real. Jinx was the only other member of the family who knew the truth, and being the cat, she wasn't willing to say anything in his defense. Besides, his dad had already suffered enough. Oswald knew it wasn't wrong to lie. He also knew that lying was not a skill he had. When he tried, he always got all nervous and sweaty and said, a lot. But in this situation, a lie might be the only way forward. He took a deep breath. So, I hit in the ball pit to play a prank on you, which I shouldn't have done. You came to look for me, and I guess you must have hit your head and lost consciousness. Oswald took a deep breath. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. This part, at least, was the truth. I accept your apologies, son, Dad said. He didn't sound mad, just tired. But you're right. You shouldn't have done it, and Jeff really should get rid of this ball pit before he has a lawsuit on his hands. Definitely, Oswald said. He knew he would rather set foot in the ball pit again. He would miss Chip and Mike, but he needed to make some friends in his own time. His mind flashed to the girl on the bench at recess, Gabriella. She seemed nice, smart too. They had a good talk. Oswald reached for his dad's hands. Let me help you stand up. With Oswald steadying him, Dad rose to his feet and let his son lead him to the exit of the ball pit. He paused to look up at the hanging yellow costume. What is that creepy thing? I have no idea, said Oswald. This, too, was the truth. They climbed out of the pit and walked through Jeff's Pizza. Jeff was wiping the counter, still watching the ball game and the restaurant's TV. He had not seen or heard anything. Still holding Oswald's hand, when was the last time he and his dad had held hands? Dad lifted his son's arm and looked at it. You're bleeding. Yeah, Oswald said. I must have scraped on my arm when I was trying to pull you out of the pit. His dad shook his head. Like I said, that thing is a public safety issue. Just sticking up a sign saying, keep out, isn't enough. Let's go. He let go of Oswald's arm. We'll get your arm cleaned up at the house, and then your mom can dress the wound once we get home from work. Oswald wondered what his mom would say when she saw the fame marks. As they approached the front door, Oswald said, Dad, I know I can be a pain sometimes, but I really do love you, you know. Dad looked at him with an expression that seemed both pleased and surprised. Same here, kiddo. He ruffled Oswald's hair. But you do have terrible taste in science fiction movies. Oh, yeah? Oswald said, smiling. Well, you have terrible taste in music, and you like boring ice cream. Together, they opened the door into the fresh night air. Behind them, Jeff called, Hey, kid, you forgot your soda. And that is Into the Pit, ladies and gentlemen. Up next is To Be Beautiful.